where the internet is, we would lose them. So I figured it out. I'm going to try and get, next month for our Skype speaker, I'm going to try and get something to, I heard there's a booster that you can use on your computer to boost internet. Maybe that would help. But probably turning the phones off, definitely turning the phones off during the Skype presentation, and it would really help a lot. Our speaker next month is Don Schmidt, who will be talking about Roswell. Don's the lead investigator for the Roswell Museum. He's been the investigator there. He's worked with Tom Perry and Kevin Randall, and he's done a couple, I think he's probably done 4 or 5 digs there at the debris site. I've been involved with a couple of them. So that's our February speaker. I'm still working on the months to come. March will be Richard Beckwith. He's also been, Don's going to be by Skype, so is Richard. Richard's on Skype from Wyoming, and he's going to talk about UFOs are real. April 18th is Warren Scott Fentress, talking also by Skype, talking about the secret space program. May, I'll be doing my presentation that I did at the Blue Fund Symposium last year in Vegas about a case for underwater alien bases. In June, we have Noel Torres, Skype, talking about his book, Cowboys and Aliens. And then we have RGK in September, and my brother Chuck again in December. So I've got several people that I haven't heard back from yet to fill in the other spots. I've got, let's see here. Oh, I thought this was interesting. This is 1971 Breeze, Illinois. If you notice the gentleman down here with the beard, that's a very, very young Stanton Friedman. Right here is J. Allen Hynek. Does anybody know who that is?
Yeah. Blue Book, right?
That's Ted Phillips.
Ted Phillips, yeah.
So, I mean, Ted, we've been involved in this very long. Everybody, locals have been involved in ufology in Missouri for very long all know Ted. I believe Ted is, he's like 75 or 76 now. But anyway, very young Ted. So I'm just going to go through just some really brief pictures, take just about 10-15 minutes. Pictures and I've got drawings that witnesses have turned in over the last year just to give you an idea of what people are seeing in the state of Missouri. Well, I've left my microphone over there, but you can probably hear me anyway. If not, you can see the screen. 2017, we had 142 sighting reports. So there were 65 that were unknown UAV or unidentified aeronautical vehicle, 28 other unknowns, which would be balls of light, that type of thing. IFO, natural phenomenon, 5. IFO man-made, 13. IFO identified, other 2. Insufficient data, 13. Information only 3. Hoaxes, 5. And when the time I put this together, we were still working on 8 of the investigations. So I really needed to update that. You can see between 13, 14, 15, and 16 how 14 and 15, well, 13 through 16, actually the numbers kind of grew. But really, it looks like we're having fewer sightings, but we're actually not. People are more aware of what's out there. We don't have near as many sky lanterns or planets or the International Space Station, and a lot of the numbers prior were those. People are just getting more, they're being more aware of what's going on, and so the sightings that we're getting are pretty incredible. Okay, so this is just a couple pictures. November, let's see, November 20, oh, okay, that was turned in. That's why that's on there. It was just turned in 2017 in El Dorado. Someone made that drawing on the left. The one on the right was February, and it's really hard to see, but you can see that there's, it's hard to see up here, but there's 3 dots. This was taken through a telescope, something that they saw over Venus. Venus doesn't have any moons, so that's not it. Dana West worked on, and actually that was the investigators that worked on these. Dana West worked on this one, This is a drawing somebody saw in St. Charles. This is a still shot of a video of something that was in St. Louis. Joe Palermo was the investigator on that. There is a video on it, except that the man's language is extremely colorful. A lot of words that start with F, and so we kind of decided that it's probably the still picture is good enough. This is another one here. Let's see if I can. Now, that's a line, kind of a line of lights and a light up at the top. And what's interesting about that is that the line of lights, this was back in July. And December 9th, we had a sighting with a line of lights that went all the way across the country. So we've had this type of thing prior to this. It's not, we're trying, people in Colorado, the investigators in Colorado are trying to say that what happened December 9th was man-made, and I really don't think so. So you see something up here, they call it that, there's something over here.
That's all I had right here. Is that Green Park? Is that in South County?
Is that Green Park, was that South County? Do you remember where that was, Joe? I don't think so. Green Park, where this video came from. Isn't that down south?
South County.
It is South County.
South County.
Is it South County?
There is a Green Park.
Yeah, South County, I do think.
It's on Lenberg, I think. Isn't it?
South of Sunset.
Yeah, I live right down the street from Green Park.
This was investigated by Larry Tyree, and this is the sketch that the witness made of what they saw. And Emmett Reary, who lives in Salem, he investigated this out of Ozark, Missouri. At first I thought, what is this? This is just this ball of something that was hovering just not too far above the house and moving back and forth between the trees. These were also investigated by Larry Tyree. This is a sketch here of what somebody saw. Kind of looks like a sideways Gulf breeze, a little bit. So you notice that some of the descriptions, this was in August in Camden, and some of the witnesses, they get really detailed, description, outer edge, center ring, and center. This was in Gosho, I guess? Gosho. Okay, so see the description here. Okay, this was in August, investigated by Larry. Then in August, investigated by John Cruzan, about 9 o'clock at night, then this light was seen. And then this was captured, were both investigated by John Cruzan. Let's see if I can get the video going.
Not mine. I got it. Sticks now.
Yeah, I believe it's, yeah, because you can see right here, there's a couple different lights that come on. You see the stuff comes back, now it's back again, there's just lights that just kind of briefly come on. Oh, that's what he's saying. Here comes another one. Here's another one.
Something that we can't see above those red lights.
Well, and then this guy had a lot of videos. This one, there were so many of them. This one, at least, he's saying, here they are again, here they again. And there were a lot of different lights that just kept appearing in different parts of the sky. This one, Chuck Frieden investigated, and he said that this was kind of weird, the smoke ring. He said that was caused by something, I forgot how he told me, but they figured it out. Well, he figured it out that somebody, it come up from something that, I don't know, it was like emitted, almost, the way he described it is almost like a smoke ring. If you're smoking, you blow a smoke ring, something emitted.
Just so I interrupt, he's actually the one who took this picture.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, he has it on his phone.
It didn't look like a smoke ring when you got directly under it. It was like just thick
thick black ring.
And this is his
Yeah,
finger, too.
yeah,
He's
look at
around
it.
it.
I thought this was really interesting.
But the thing about it was I didn't know what it was at the time, where I was stopping, done more research on it. When I got home, I YouTubed the black ring in the sky, and they're all over the world.
They are.
Yeah, so
And Chuck, see, I got out here because I thought it was really interesting. Chuck seemed to think it was explainable, but I did some research like you did too, and I thought, I don't know, I'm not. It just,
the camera got out of focus because I roofed the car.
yeah, I just thought it was really interesting
Had I
that,
known what I saw when I got home, all the other things around the world, I would have stopped and
and videotaped it live. Well, that's great that you was going to turn that in. That's been fantastic. I mean, he said that he thought that something had emitted it, but he didn't know exactly what. And so I like to just call something an unknown if we, you know, he said, okay, this fire or this factory or this did this.
well,
But,
I know what smoke rings look like. I know what. Right.
and I thought it would, but, I mean, and you're right, there were videos, I did look it up, and I found at least 3 other videos that were turned in through MUFON that had the same kind of smoke ring.
There was one off of Highway 44, and there are a few in Missouri like that.
I'm gonna do some more research on that and see if, you know, what's causing them or what the deal is on. I just thought it was, just that it stayed, that it didn't dissipate. I mean, it just, you know, like and you see, you can, there you are driving under it. I mean, it's just,
It's not moving. It's
yeah, it's just there.
Yes, I looked. There was a. I actually, that's what once I got under, I looked to the right, and it was just a farmhouse and an open field with nothing there. I thought maybe there might have been a fire. I know when tractors start up, they go up a ring, but it just dissipates immediately.
It was just the defined edges of it I thought was really interesting.
It wasn't smoky then. It wasn't. He's on.
And then this was an object that was investigated by Joe Palermo and myself. If we didn't figure out where, you know, exactly what it was, it's, you know, obviously it's not a helicopter or airplane. I'm going through these really quick because we have a speaker tonight, but I just want to give you a general idea of what people turn in. This was you can see here, there's a fence, a big ball of light that was just hovering over the fence line. I investigated something back in 2000 and I think it was 7. I don't know if anybody got had the book 37 Parallel. I can't remember the name of the year now, but it was a ball of light like that that was hovering over the tree line. It was the size of a house. I investigated something that looked exactly like this before too, and it was seen in South St. Louis, and that's been probably about 8 years ago. It looked exactly like that. The guy got video of it during the day. I thought it was a balloon, but it wasn't. So I thought this was in Brashear. That was in October. This was May. Investigated by Dana West, and this is investigated by George Hampton. So this would have to be in the Columbia area.
That's up by Kirksville, for sure.
Yep.
These diamond-shaped things that come in when people zoom in on stuff, oftentimes that's created by humans of the plant. It isn't necessarily that shape.
It isn't necessary. I had one that was actually that shape. It was during the day, and we watched it float. I thought it was a Mylar balloon, and it wasn't because it was just the reaction was. But there was a little bit here. But okay, these were, let's see, Larry Tyree captured these himself at East Summit.
All right.
This is a, let's see, still shot of it. There's the video. This was something Brett Britt Faborg and Bill Chapman investigated this. This is a sketch that someone made, and I thought that was kind of interesting too, because this is the same kind of craft that was drawn back in Piedmont, 1973. She drew something that looked a lot like this. Gosh, I can't remember her name. It was in February of 1973. And even though this is just a ball of light, I have several different investigations that I've done that they just see this orange ball of light moving across the sky. This one here wasn't really any time, you know, it may or may not have been a sky lantern, but from the witness of where it was, and it was just hovering, and what it was, it ended up being unknown. This one we thought was interesting. It's hard to see, so it's small. But this is probably, was that the sun shining through that? The sun wasn't there, was it?
No,
No. This Joe took a look at this picture.
it's,
You can see this light, and you can see it reflecting down here, but this is what's really interesting. Look at the line of the row of lights up here. No, that's if you look really close, it's several lights in kind of a half moon shape. These were pictures that were taken from Maple Woods College, investigated by Britt and Bill. This was during the eclipse. Now, there were balloons and several other different objects that were in the sky during the eclipse. I think they ruled a lot of that out. And these, if you have any questions about them too, I can later on, you know, I can look up the descriptions and the case numbers for you. But I just wanted to briefly go through. This is what we're working on now. This happened December 9th. So we had this row of lights that was seen coming all the way across. And actually the government said it started here and worked its way here. We believe they actually started here and worked their way all the way up into Canada. And from the times and the placements, it seems like, and it's really hard to figure too because of all the different time changes. But nearest we could figure it got across the country in about 2 hours, even though they said it was a line of these, it was these planes right here that were lined up, right there across the sky. Flight was, well, the aviation expert Steve Hallwell said the planes were flying in a formation that's commonly seen in military exercises. The flight path from Nevada to South Carolina with a return flight at 4 a.m. December 10th, 2017. The lights belonged to a convoy of C-17 aircraft that were involved in an exercise. CBS Denver was told the planes were headed from South Carolina to Nevada and back at a reduced speed, modified to run silent. So they modified these big planes to run silent. They made them fly slower. They put them in a line so they came across the sky like this. And even though flying slower, they got across the whole country in about 2 hours. So this is when you can tell us how government now, you know. This video was taken in Colorado. So you can see the lights. They're trying to say that this is those planes lined up like that going across the country, except that Emmett Reary, who's our section director in Salem, actually saw them, and he watched them for 6 minutes hovering before they slowly moved away. Now, those planes obviously don't hover. Britt's witness said that birds fell out of the sky, and there was a flock of birds that were walking around stunned, and he said the witness was walking amongst the birds. They just walked, they were doves, and they just, you know, they were stunned by something. People's cameras cut out, but then again, you know, these were these government planes that went across the sky, and they lined them up. And so, anyway, needless to say, we are not alone. So that's a brief, just a little collage of what people have turned in over the last year. And now we can get to our speaker here. Here's Google Earth Calendar. Which year on yeah, that way you still got 716. We go from
might talk fast, but it should be about half an hour.
Oh, and then I can get the lessons and that.
Perfect, yeah. I have handouts, but these ones are very tiny, so Debbie made some ones that won't get lost. It's just a link to the website where I keep some of my research. After this presentation, I'll put my slides up. Can you guys hear me in the back?
You're gonna have to speak up, bud. Either that or use the microphone.
If I project, can you hear me in the back? Okay, so I have some handouts. They have a short link to a website where I've been keeping updated some of the research that I've been doing on this topic for the last 2 or 3 years. And after this presentation, I'll put up my slides, and once I have the video, I'll put up the video as well. So we can pass these around. Debbie's also passing around the ones that are easier to not lose. Mine are like fortune cookie size. Hers are like business card size.
Yeah, I can when I flopped them, they got one bigger.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Again, this is a topic that is kind of a passion project of mine. I work in computer security, and so thank you. I've been looking into the history of UFOs and hackers. If you Google UFO hacker, you find all about the most recent person that I'm going to talk about. What most people don't realize is that there are 2 hackers that came before him that most people do not know about, one of which, throughout my investigation, I was unable to uncover the actual identity of.
Wait, Tom, you want to tell a little bit about yourself?
I've got a slide for
Oh,
that.
that's right, you do have a slide, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, I'm calling this presentation UFO Hackers in History 103. You'll see that I call it 103 because 101 and 102 were given by a cybersecurity speaker who speaks at the DEF CON conference in Las Vegas. So these are the 3 hackers, the 4 people that I will profile, 3 hackers and 1 researcher and professional speaker. The first one went by the alias Quentin. Again, I was unable to cover his real identity. He was simply known as Quentin when he appeared on television with his voice distorted and his face blacked out. The second one hacked under the alias Coogee, and his real name was Matthew Bevan. We know this because the U.S. government brought suit against him after he was discovered hacking into military installations. The third that most people have heard about hacked under the name Solo. His name was Gary Mckinnon. This is the one where if you Google UFO hacker, you can read all about him. And interestingly enough, he spoke at the 2017 MUFON Symposium via Skype. It's probably a good thing that he wasn't there in person, because another hacker who went by the name Malware Tech was actually arrested after attending the DEF CON hacking conference in Las Vegas. He was indicted by the FBI. Finally, I will talk about Richard Thiem, who has been speaking at DEF CON since the 90s, and he really bridges the gap between government and the public sector. He spoke at the first Black Hat conference, which was not just for hackers like DEF CON, it was also for corporate interested professional hackers, as well as government entities interested in hackers. So, in the way of explanation, what do I mean when I say black hat? There are 3 kinds of hackers. A black hat hacker hacks with malicious intent to steal, damage, or destroy information. A white hat hacker is a corporate professional hacker who works to defend computer systems. This is what myself and my colleagues do professionally. A gray hat hacker, on the other hand, is a hacker who hacks for ethical or ideological reasons. These hackers kind of have one foot in each world. This was how Gary Mckinnon identified. This is how I sometimes identify as well. However, the guy who got me started in hackers, a guy who was named Aesthetics, he said, there is no hack. So take that as you will. In the way to talk about myself a little bit, I am a licensed private investigator. I'm a card-carrying MUFON member, someday hopefully a MUFON investigator myself. And I'm an ethical hacker. I use hacker in the old sense of the word, simply to mean programmer. Anyone who hacks on the computers is, in my book, a programmer, software developer, something like that. It's kind of a joke, as this picture demonstrates. I'm not native to the sunlight. I spend a lot of time inside in front of my computer. You can see my eyes squinting. This was also the first t-shirt I ever ordered online for myself, first clothes I ever bought myself from thinkgeek.com. I had a previous job, and I'm an expert in something called OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence. This is the intelligence that you can find publicly available on the internet, the things that you can use to research people as a private investigator, that you can use to profile them, and so forth. I work for the private sector only. I want to get that out there. I've never worked for the government. I've never held a security clearance. I want to know that you guys can trust me and that I'm not here to sow disinformation or misinformation. I'm here absolutely for myself. This was a passion project of mine to do this research and to come forward with it. Again, love MUFON, MUFON member, have my card in my wallet. So here's a rough outline of my presentation and also a discussion of prior art. I like to talk about prior art to show that I am standing on the shoulders of giants. I did not hack into the military myself. I did research into those who did. There are 3 known cases of UFO hackers. Not just the most popular one, Gary Mckinnon, who got the most publicity. There's a long history of trying to look in military systems for evidence of UFOs in the hacking scene. The earliest known cases I found were on or before 1992 to 1994. The hackers did their work in 92. They were, for the one who was prosecuted, his hacking activities began in 1994. These people, just to reiterate, went by the hacker aliases Quentin. That was the earliest in 92, least well known. Through my research, I was unable to find his identity, although I will show you what it was that he published in 92. Matthew Kuji Bevan, who hacked during the period from 1994 to 1996, and Gary Solo Mckinnon in the early 2000s. Richard Thiem is a public speaker whom I admire. He speaks at the hacking conference annually at DEF CON in Las Vegas, and I was able to hear him speak this last summer as well as attending the 2017 MUFON Symposium that Gary spoke at. So we're going to do some case studies here. We're going to look at each of these hackers and all of the information I was able to uncover about each, as well as their hacking activities and what it was that they uncovered. The first and least well known that I want to talk about is Quentin. Quentin's true identity is unknown. He obtained IP addresses, which are akin to phone numbers, which he then published in a hacker e-zine called Frack Magazine. This was well known in the hacking scene in the 80s and early 90s. It is a magazine where hackers would post about their techniques, their exploits, what it was they had discovered. What was published in Frack Magazine in 1992 contained what at that time was classified information, what was considered top secret. It actually led to a raid on the offices of Frack Magazine, which were here in St. Louis. Quentin was never prosecuted. His identity was never uncovered. I presume he is a U.S. person who hacked U.S. systems. He worked with 1 or 2 others, and in the publication of Frack, they called this Project Green Cheese. As we all know, the moon is made of it. So, I'd like to show a video. This video is from Dateline NBC in 1992. I'll only show a segment of it that deals with Quentin. NBC was doing an expose on hackers, And this is some of the earliest publicity that hackers got in mainstream news. There'll be some data on the screen that goes by quickly. Don't worry, I have screenshots later on. Thank you. I paused it.
Crime by computer hackers. They've been glamorized by Hollywood, most recently in the hit film Sneakers. But how do real hackers operate? And just what kind of damage can they do? Tonight, John Scott. They access ours.
We're good.
I have access, you name it, really, credit companies, telephone companies, government installations, military installations, political organizations, senators' computer systems.
His voice is altered, his face hidden, his name an alias. In fact, we don't even know his real name. That's the only way Quentin would agree to talk to us, because Quentin is a hacker, a computer genius who illegally breaks into computers for fun.
Have you ever shared information about a company, say, with one of their competitors?
That I have not done.
Tempted to?
There's always kind of the lurking temptation.
It's a frightening thought. Someone breaking into your computer and roaming around in it with the potential to share, sell, even alter what they see. But that's what hackers can do. Quentin told us he's read the private mail of a U.S. senator, browsed through secret government files on UFOs, and gone snooping in our nation's military computers.
Do you recognize that what you do is illegal?
Yeah, that I do.
Is it immoral?
To me, no.
More and more hackers like Quentin are out there, illegally breaking into systems that could contain information about you.
Little sensational. All right. So these are the screenshots I wanted to show you from that video. Particularly some of the data that I was able to find the source of from Frack Magazine, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Kirtland Air Force Base. Hackers had read into the UFO lore, and they went to target these installations specifically because they had been connected with incidents such as Roswell. This is some of the text, and I'll pull up the full text file in a moment, but this is what was in the e-zine Frack that was printed. The first part was called Project ALF-1, a planetary effort. They made it top secret, top secret, top secret, and part of what I omitted here, they asked their reconnaissance, if you will, for the activities that they then pursued in finding the IP addresses of the secret computer systems. The Project Green Cheese, the real dirt of it, they targeted Holloman Air Force Base, among others. I don't list them all here. Location, New Mexico, preconceived landing 15 years ago. Kirtland Air Force Base, the Office of Special Investigations there. It's also where Sandia Labs are housed and part of the NSA Equipment Intercept Division. This is in 1992, far before Snowden. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base cataloged a UFO parts list, autopsies on record, bodies located in underground facility of the Foreign Technology Building. And I'll pull up the text file here. This is on the internet right now. It's in the Frack Magazine archives. So this was issue number 42, and it came out in files. This was file number 13, and again, it was 1992 when this was published. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here. There's a lot of places to get hacker wares and stuff like that. This is the text file. They talk about Milnet TAC ID cards, Jet Propulsion Labs, Sandia Labs, all these places that were targeted If you go to the short link in the handout, it's the first link from my post that links to this article if you want to read it in its entirety from Frack Magazine, which was an easy. Here's the full text of the Project ALF-1. They had done all sorts of research. The U.S. Space Command Surveillance Center in Cheyenne Mountain. All of these military installations were targeted by Quentin and his two accomplices, one or two accomplices. All sorts of cover-up, national security research. They really did their research on the UFO lore with names, Operation Majestic 12, all of these specific things that the hackers targeted. Roswell, New Mexico crashes, Jesse Marcel, a name you might recognize. The people involved, they wanted to go after, they wanted to do searches. They went into the government computers and they did a Control F or a find in the page to try and search and find for these names, these known incidents. Bob Lazar is listed. Yeah, so down here we get to the dirt. These are HollomanGW.af.mil. That was, at the time, the website for Holloman Air Force Base. The IP addresses are listed. Cisco is listed. The type of router is listed. The type of protocols, EGP and IP. All of these hosts. This is the real dirt. This is why Frack Magazine got in big trouble for publishing this stuff. Kirtland Air Force Base, Fort Irwin, Moffett Field, all sorts of, look, PentagonBCN.Army.mil. You know, this is, if I were trying today, I would go to this from 1992 and see how many of these IP addresses are still active today, because legacy systems often stay around in one form or another.
Were the first two architects?
No. For which set?
Thickness and beam.
.131.23 is Kirtland Air Force. 132.62. These ones here, 26.17, 26.18, and the 26.0 range. Did you work there?
No, but I know of the networks.
We can talk later. This is a top secret network with all the coordinators having the last name Win as a NetBIOS name. And down here at the bottom, SCINet. That stands for Specially Compartmentalized Information Network. They have an IP address for it. It's a 192.12 address. It might be local. You might have to take some hops to get inside that barrier. Also, DISNet, Defense Integrated Secure Network, which is composed of SCINet, Worldwide Military and Command Control System, Intercomputer Network Communication Subsystem, and SecretNet, 22.0 range. Again, look at the link in the handout. It's the first link to Frack Magazine. Scroll to the bottom, and you can look at all of this data for yourself. Now on to Matthew Bevan. Matthew Bevan was from the UK. He was the first hacker who was indicted by the US government. They tried to prosecute him. He hacked into the US military. He has a site, kujimedia.com, where you can read about all of the press releases. You can look at video. This was all the public information. He runs this website maybe because he's a little proud of what he did in the mid-90s. I'll show this in the next slide. When he hacked into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he found blueprints for an anti-gravity drive, as well as a vehicle that was capable of going Mach 12 to Mach 15, faster than anything we have today or had at the time. The user that he hacked into had a blank password. This is going to be a theme. So, you know, one could argue that was publicly available information. The case was ultimately dropped. The case against him was dropped by the US military, and the reason that it was dropped is because the Department of Defense would have had to admit publicly in court what their vulnerability was. And they were not about to be so embarrassed as to say one of their employees had a blank password. So they did not admit it in court. The case was ultimately dropped, and Matthew Bevan was never prosecuted. He still lives in the United Kingdom. He worked with an accomplice hacker who went by the alias DataStream Cowboy. And again, I refer you to kujimedia.com to look at many, more than I cover in this presentation, newspaper articles, as well as video, mainstream media coverage that this got at the time. You get hacked by the military indicts you, that's public, and you get media coverage. So, in the next slide here, I have a quote. This is a direct quote from Matthew Bevan. He was quoted in a paper at the time. I'm going to read this. In getting into that, which is a reference to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, there was one machine on the network where I read current files and future project proposals. I read documents which gave me the impression that they had an anti-gravity engine which was capable of at least Mach 12 to Mach 15. I don't know exactly how fast that is, but I think it's faster than most aircraft we know of today. Supposedly, the aircraft which employs this engine uses a reactor to which there were a lot of detailed numbers and figures for, but I have no idea what all this meant. I can remember that the documents referred to a super heavy element, whatever that means. The element is the main fuel for the reactor. The engine worked by making a disturbance of molecules at the front of the craft so that it was able to stop the inertia or G-force inside the craft. I got the impression that this information was the type of material I was looking for because it was far in advance of our current technology and could be something to do with the Roswell UFO. Finding this threw me because I didn't know if this information was a disinformation exercise and that people were meant to get in and find this stuff, or if it was real. I can't be sure, and that's the annoying thing. Matthew Bevan had doubts. He wanted to believe, but he wasn't sure if this had been left in the open as a misinformation campaign, as a disinformation campaign. However, and I like to quote Matthew Bevan on this, he said, quote, "I like to believe that what I saw was not disinformation." On to the most popular and famous hacker, Gary Mckinnon. He's the most well-known. If you just do a Google search for UFO hacker, you can read many, many articles on him. He, again, found a blank password on a NASA computer, and I can tell you from personal experience, don't tell my high school teachers, that I was hacking using the same techniques around the same time in the early 2000s. 12 years, he was prosecuted, he was indicted by the US government, and there was a very, very lengthy legal battle between the UK government and the United States government. The United States wanted to extradite him to try him in the United States. This lasted several terms of presidents and several prime ministers in the UK. Bush actually met with Tony Blair, the prime minister at the time, and brought up hackers in a way to go retroactively and try and be able to extradite retroactively hackers who've done it in the past. This specifically targeted Gary, really. Gary has Asperger's syndrome. He was diagnosed with adult Asperger's after his hacking, and ultimately it was a medical defense that it would be against his human rights to extradite him. The Home Secretary of the United States, the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, Theresa May, ultimately dropped the extradition case against him after a very lengthy legal battle lasting 12 years. What did Gary find? What has he said publicly that he found? He says that he found a spreadsheet titled Fleet to Fleet Transfers, with the names of ships not recognized as any known ships in the U.S. Navy or the U.S. Arsenal. He found a document titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. He spoke this summer at the MUFON Symposium in Las Vegas via Skype, as I mentioned earlier. Our own Debbie was also a speaker. The DVDs are available through the MUFON website, just to plug. Them and the symposium proceedings are now being offered as a bundle for 50% off. And the symposium proceedings include the transcript of Gary's talk, in which he describes in technical detail how he committed his hacks. Believe me, I have a copy. Here's some Las Vegas news coverage of Gary and the MUFON Symposium before it happened in Las Vegas.
Isn't it something your grandma saw your back in the day?
Oh, perfect. An advertising. My favorite.
The Secret family, that's really something. For nearly 40 years, families have trusted.
Yeah, I know. That would be a righteous hack. Get rid of the ads.
Just in case.
New at 11, does the U.S. military have its own secret space program separate from the NASA space effort? A computer hacker says he's seen the evidence and will talk about it at a Las Vegas symposium this weekend. His name is Gary Mckinnon. He's a computer whiz out of the United Kingdom. Back in 2001, while searching online for evidence about UFOs, he accessed classified NASA computers.
That's a space blanket. We know this one's a space blanket.
UFO evidence, he says he
That's
found
a
files
triangle,
about a
though.
secret space program operated by the U.S. Navy, including the names of off-planet crew members.
Space blanket.
The president
Sorry.
of the Mutual UFO Network, which meets in Las Vegas this week, told us what Mckinnon uncovered.
Basically, Donna Hare, who had worked for NASA, had told him about specific buildings where they were airbrushing artifacts out of photographs. So it was getting rid of UFOs in photographs before releasing them to the public from NASA. And he wanted to go find some of that stuff. And in his search for that information, this is what he stumbled upon. Literally a secret space fleet within the U.S. Navy.
McKinnon was arrested for the computer break-in, and the U.S. tried to extradite him for that trial, but after an 8-year legal battle, the British government refused to turn him over. So Saturday at noon, Mckinnon is going to speak via Skype to the Mutual UFO Network Symposium, meeting in Las Vegas Friday through Sunday. Several other speakers will address the different aspects of the alleged secret space program. If you would like more information on the event, a link is posted on our website, and we will have more for you tomorrow night.
I can't believe that was
Nice
It's
news.
a silvery reflective blanket, and it was space debris that was lost on a shuttle mission, and that was actually the picture from the shuttle as it drifted away. If an astronaut is doing EVA, they may have been trying to put this blanket over something to radiation shield something, and they lost grip of it. The astronaut lost grip of it, and it floated away into space. That's where that photo of the alleged Black Knight comes from. Sorry to be a debunker, but. So again about Gary, it was mentioned, Jan Harzan mentioned it in the video, executive director of MUFON, but Gary was very interested in UFOs from an early age. His dad had had UFO experiences, and Gary looked into the Disclosure Project around the year 2000 to 2001 that was put together by Dr. Stephen Greer. Now, in the Disclosure Project, this, Donna Hare was essentially a whistleblower from NASA who said that there's video of her online, she met with people off-site, she would take them to lunch, she would talk with them, and get them to talk about what they were doing, and some of them were airbrushing UFOs out of photos in Building 8 at Johnson Space Center. So when Gary Mckinnon, and I can talk about his technique, he wrote a Perl script, it would scan 65,535 IPs at once, and he targeted what he knew to be NASA subsets of that. He hacked into the Department of Defense, the Air Force, the US military, and NASA. And when he got into NASA, when he got into Johnson Space Center, he looked at the NetBIOS names, the names of the computer systems. He got his way to Building 8, and what do you know? Once he set up a remote desktop connection, he saw the pictures of the UFOs that they were airbrushing out. And unfortunately, he had not done the calculation correctly with the time zone difference. It was during the workday for NASA, and he saw someone move the cursor to the lower left and disconnect the internet. As far as any memory artifacts that might have existed, hard drive evidence, it's very curious. His computers were seized, the hard drives were never returned. The same thing happened to Matthew Bevan's Commodore 64. It was seized by Scotland Yard, then it was conveniently lost by the police. So the hard digital evidence of these hacks is lost. However, we know the hacks did happen. Why else would the US government try so hard to prosecute these hackers?
Hacking with a Commodore 64? That's awesome.
It was the 90s. Oh, sorry. Again, why do I believe Gary's story? Why do I believe that he's telling the truth about the non-terrestrial officers and the fleet-to-fleet transfers? Now, some sources online have claimed that Gary knew the names of the ships in the secret space fleet. Names like USS Hillenkotter, after the first director of the CIA, USS LeMay. He says an unsubstantiated source on the internet says that those were the names of the ships. That, I believe, is a rumor. Gary has claimed all along in all of his television appearances that he did not remember the name of the ships. He also says he was high while he was hacking on marijuana. So, but why do I believe him? I found this CD-ROM that was labeled Hacking Tools and Cracks from something that I had burned back in high school. It included this hacking program called Proxynator. When you look at the About Proxynator window, the hacker who wrote it says, "Thanks go to Solo, who posted on Battlezone forums the great idea which this program implements." Gary was posting on web forums about his tools, tactics, and techniques. He used his alias, Solo, always spelt in all capitals. I was using the same techniques at the same time. This is why I believe Gary's story. So what does this all mean? In short, the US military and government, including NASA, know far more than they tell about the UFO reality. Even with the Pentagon disclosures from December, those are the very tip of the iceberg of information that is still classified within deep black programs. Hackers have broken into US military and government systems many times over the years, at least 3. A few times they have obtained evidence. However, each time their equipment and computers were confiscated and conveniently lost. Gary may know the names of secret spaceships in the fleet, but he refuses to tell. Perhaps to protect friends or acquaintances to whom he told the truth, he consistently claims not to remember the names of the ships in the secret space fleet. There is a link to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Both Quentin and Bevan hacked into Wright-Patterson. Richard Thiem, who speaks at DEF CON, straddles the line between government, secret, and public knowledge at times, and this is a direct quote from him, telling the truth through fiction. Because when it's classified, you can't talk about it. But if you write a fiction novel, that's okay. Will Gary still be speaking? Gary had a good reason not to come forward until now and to appear only via Skype at the MUFON Symposium. as I said, if he had set foot on American soil, we might never hear from him again. Richard Thiem, on the other hand, speaks annually at the DEF CON hacking convention in Las Vegas, and several times, twice, has given lectures on UFOs at a hacking convention. However, he is not a hacker. He is an author and a public speaker. After DEF CON, oh, I mentioned this, another hacker from the UK, Malware Tech, he was detained. He was questioned by the FBI because of malware that he had written while a teenager. When I asked Richard Thiem, should I join the secret space program? Should I enlist? He said no. He said, you won't get what you're looking for. What you're looking for is information, and you will not get it in the secret space navy. In essence, I would probably end up being used. So who is Richard Thiem? He's been speaking about UFOs at DEF CON since 2007. He's been speaking at DEF CON much longer than that. He's a former Episcopal priest. He's a keynote speaker at the first Black Hat Hacker Convention, which was when the government really started trying to get involved with the hacking scene. He is known to walk the line between secret government and public knowledge. Speaks at DEF CON, gave UFO-related talks in 2007, 2009, and 2013, all of which will be linked to in a future slide. He co-authored the book, UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry, which chronicles thousands of well-documented military cases from governments around the world. These are cases similar to the recently disclosed Intercept program, where the Pentagon showed gun camera footage from an FA-18 fighter jet. His book is the only book on UFOs that is academic enough to be recommended to be included in university libraries. It's a thick book, but it's that good, and I recommend it. So, I will not go to these videos. You can click the links after I post the slides, or they're listed on the short link that got handed out. There's a lecture on Gary Mckinnon and Matthew Bevan from UFO Crash Con in the UK. I highly recommend this video. It was very informative to me and very helped my research. All of Gary's 3 talks on hacking ufology, 101, 102, the government and UFOs, those were all given to a technical audience of hackers at the DEF CON hacking conference in Las Vegas. Government and UFOs, he summarizes the information of the book that he co-authored with Michael Swords. Short link time. Did everybody get a handout? Excellent. If you don't, you can write it down. We've got extras. The short link, if you can remember it, is bit.do/UFOSIN, as in UFOs intelligence. I've compiled most of my research there. It is a short link to a Reddit post, so you'll all know my Reddit username, but there are many links to YouTube videos. I've been researching this exact topic for years, and it continues to fascinate me why underground hackers love to look for evidence of UFOs. A very interesting side note, in 1992, when those publications came out in Frack magazine, if you read the document, the hackers involved, Quentin and his accomplices, were actually trying to add legitimacy to the hacking scene. Hackers were seen as pranksters. They were not treated, they were not really given much of a public eye. And they were trying to really add credibility to the hacking scene by hacking the government, by showing the government was vulnerable, and by showing the UFO information it was hiding. These are some other online sources and articles. They are linked to from the short link. One is called From Coogee to Solo by Ryan Sprague. One is UFO hacker Gary Mckinnon article by a fellow Redditor named Joel Hassey. And from Gaia.com, hackers expose secret space missions and government UFO research. Now, they may have amended this article, but at the time I read it, it mentioned Hillenkotter, LeMay, those names that I couldn't substantiate. So I'm not sure if there are factual errors in the Gaia.com article. Here's my soapbox. I consider myself an ethical hacker. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, but I want to open a conversation about the ethics of what should be kept secret versus what the public should know. The government and military secrets have a closed-door policy. They call it a need to know. You aren't read in on a project if you don't have the need to know about it. It allows these compartments and these secrecy agreements to stay in place. My question is, very few can wholly know, does this really serve the needs of the many? It requires clearance, top secret SCI for specially compartmentalized information. There are, according to one source, there are 37 levels above top secret, hence the forum abovetopsecret.com where these projects are discussed. Apparently, the president is only cleared for 17 levels above top secret, meaning that there are 20 levels that the president doesn't even know about. Secret black military programs. Whistleblowers are prosecuted for coming forward with this information. Just look at Snowden. There's no anti-gravity for the public, and more importantly, there is no free energy devices that could possibly liberate us from our dependence on fossil fuels. I think there's some very vested interest in keeping that information secret. On the other hand, if this all became public knowledge, if we had full disclosure tomorrow, there would be an open door policy. Now granted, with a national security angle, the US's enemies would also know about our top secret aircraft, our anti-gravity capability. No one can truly know in the public view. There's very skeptical. We're not sure if it's information or disinformation. The needs of the planet. The needs of the many, outweigh the needs of the few. If we all had anti-gravity technology, I think it would be a boon for mankind. It would be an incredibly positive thing. I think most of the people in this room might agree that there are classified technologies that, when made public, will change our world. Everyone has a need to know in my book. With this kind of information, everyone has a need to know. Everyone on Earth would not need a clearance. Whistleblowers would be heroes. Anti-gravity for everyone, and free energy replaces our need for fossil fuel. Thank you for the soapbox. Now, as a little bonus, I can show you about a crop circle I investigated some years ago, and then I'll take questions. I got it. Escape.
Oh. Should be right down right there. You go.
Okay, so I found a Google Earth repository of known crop circles around the world. And I found the closest one to us. It's in High Ridge, Missouri, and I'll show you what I found, and I'll talk about what I investigated as part of a personal field investigation. So let me scroll a little bit away from this road intersection. And my crop circle is right here. Now, I went with 2 friends to investigate this in person, but before I talk about that, I want to use an amazing feature on Google Earth to go back in time and look at historical satellite photos. Still there. Blurry photo, but still there. Still there. Going back in time, 2015, 2014, 13. I think it was about 13 when I investigated it. Might have been 2012 with 2 friends. How clear is this? Now I know some crop circles are hoaxes. I know some are done by people. But the fact that it's been there for so long means it's either being kept up by the locals or there's really something to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the oldest that I found of this crop circle was all the way back in the 90s. This is 2002 here. 96. You can still see the circle.
96?
So, let me talk about the field investigation here for a
That's
moment.
22 years. I would have to
All right,
research
this is
it
a recent
with
one.
the fellows, but I don't know of any trace line cases
We
that
went,
lasted that long.
we explored all of these different sections of the crop circle, myself and 2 friends. We drove out, it's about 45 minutes away. And at the time, Stephen Greer had an iPhone app that you could use the internal magnetometer, the compass in the iPhone to measure spikes. And at the very center of this crop circle, there was a spike. There was an electromagnetic spike. You had to stand in the very middle, and the needle would go like that. You saw the EM spike in the very middle. So thank you for letting me share that. That was just kind of the kicker. I'm trying to show my credentials as an investigator, and then MUFON will bring me on someday. I am. I'm moving to Seattle. I'll have to start a new chapter. So that's the end of my presentation.
Awesome.
The magazine that was here in town, do you know anybody that is involved with it or is still around?
Yes, thank you. That was one of the investigation angles I took. I reached out to alias Eric Bloodaxe, also known as Chris Goggins, who was the editor of Frack Magazine at the time. I inquired about Quentin. I showed him my research. He said that he did not have any leads for me on the true identity of Quentin. Another lead that I have not followed up is the producers of that NBC Dateline segment, but as they say in the video, Quentin only agreed to meet with them if they used a fake name. So I don't think they even know his true identity. Thank you.
Do you, well, I got a quick question. Do you ever go on the government website and buy books? I went on there looking for something. I went looking for books on underwater topography.
Yeah.
And I came across this website that was government books, governmentpublications.com or something. Anyway, I buy all these books really. The first hour I was on it, I hurried up and bought a whole bunch of books, and then it made me, I thought, oh, they're just gonna, my computer's just gonna crash. And then they made me give all my credit card information. I'm thinking, oh gosh. Oh no, all the books came, and like twice a week they say, oh, we got these books on sale. I have found things that are our military in space, battles in space, I mean, all this,
Really?
and they're letting me buy all of it until about a month ago, and this book came up, and all of a sudden this red sign came across and said, you are not authorized, you don't have the clearance to buy this book. I was like, really? So I took a screenshot with my phone, and it says, they let me buy everything else from last year. It says, Joint Military Intelligence College, beneath the surface, intelligence preparation of the battle space for counterterrorism, and it's got their symbols. So I mean, there's a copy of the book that they wouldn't let me buy it, but I've been buying everything else. But go on the.
You don't have a need to know.
So,
You're not clear.
I think my point about it is that some of this stuff is out there. You just have to know where to look for it.
Exactly.
And these books, I mean, I go on this government, I'll forward over the website, but
please.
Yeah, we obviously have a military in space because I've been buying the books, and some of these books from like 1979 are military in space. We've got our patches and.
That's
oh
great research. That's great research. And again, that would be considered open source intelligence. If it's publicly available and you can buy the books, that's open source. And furthermore, I've looked into some of this when I was thinking I wanted to be a recruit for the secret space program. The Naval Postgraduate College offers 2 classes in space systems. Now they couch it as being about satellites or, aerial, spy satellites to spy on our enemies, that type of thing. And I'm just really curious about what's discussed in that classroom.
I just want to say, I've heard, because I do a lot of research in the secret space program, that they actually have their eye on children at a young age. Certain, candidates for the secret space program. As far as standardized testing, they look for certain things, and these kids get pulled aside at a young age for special classes that they might not have any understanding why they're taking all throughout their life, and they just end up being bombarded by recruiters and stuff, and it's almost like programming. They just go towards that because of what's put around them, and they don't even have to. They basically volunteer.
You're making me rethink gifted programs.
There's a guy that I went to high school with. He works in propulsion for Mark Area. He's a supervisor. He's also a retired officer. I figured anybody knows.
Definitely. The ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, these are the people in the know. These are the people that are read in on some of these special projects.
You were saying that the thing that we know as Black Knight satellite is really a space blanket?
That was an article debunking it that I had read, yeah.
That you read, so you really don't know for sure?
I did not do the investigation myself. There was also a podcast called the Wow Signal podcast that the first article about the Black Knight satellite came out in the UK, and the guy who was sort of behind that story breaking wanted to set the story straight, and he appeared on this podcast and said in so many words that it was just a story that got out of hand, and it was really debunking the Black Knight. Now, to the believers in the room, please continue to dig in. It's a fascinating topic. If it really is giving off radio emissions, we ought to be able to pick those up. And the perfect polar orbit, no satellites of ours have a perfect polar orbit. They all miss it by a few degrees. There are maybe a few Russian satellites that get the closest, but our satellites do not orbit over the poles.
What is your opinion of the whole, this little bitty disclosure that happened in
the
December?
Pentagon story, yeah.
And they keep this, the stuff I listen to, Grant Cameron.
Love Grant Cameron.
Yeah, he's amazing. And he's saying that there's going to be this more and more of it coming out in piecemeal, more videos, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. My opinion? Drip, drip, drip.
Right.
Slow disclosure, slow rollout. Now, Grant Cameron points out that with UFO Cover-Up Live in 1988, the year I was born, this is not the first time the government has worked to do some kind of slow drip, drip rollout type of disclosure. He points out that it's been happening for years through several initiatives over the decades. I understand why the U.S. government favors this approach as opposed to a full disclosure right now tomorrow. According to the initial studies, some of the research studies that supposedly Majestic 12 or Magic 12 did in the 40s and 50s, there would be a panic. Think of when Orson Welles did his radio broadcast of the War of the Worlds. There was a panic. They did not want the public to go crazy. They did not want people to think the world was ending or being invaded. They need the public to accept this and to think of it as ordinary, something that is really happening. And as I went on my ethical soapbox, I want as much to be disclosed as is possible. When I think it was Luis Elizondo went on Gary Knapp's Coast to Coast radio show, he mentioned that there are something like 24 videos, 38 technical reports that are hundreds of pages in length. There should be more information coming in the coming months. Apparently it's not years, it's months.
Right.
I am following Tom DeLonge's project with great interest. There were skeptics. There were saying it was a money grab to pay off his failed hot dog stand.
Right.
I have his challenge coin in my wallet. I support Tom DeLonge and his efforts at disclosure. I understand that it might take time.
Right.
TTT, things take time.
Right.
So I encourage the UFO community to be patient and wait for this information to continue to come out in such a way as not to cause any type of public panic. Sure.
How did you take the term non-terrestrial officer? Did you take that as our Navy personnel that are offshore, or that they are, that have always been non-terrestrial?
Wow, great question. I think that's open to interpretation. I think Gary's words are open to interpretation. Those are his words of a document he saw on, I believe, a Navy system. So it could be officers at sea, officers permanently at sea, as in non-land based. On the other hand, and I forget where I read this, what's the book, Stranger at the Pentagon?
Yeah.
So
Frank Strange's.
So Stranger at the Pentagon could be one of these non-terrestrial officers that came from somewhere else, was stationed here, and that's his mission.
So one of the books that I bought on this government website was paraphrased. It was basically how to communicate with extraterrestrials, and that's one of the books. I'm going to bring all of them next week. When you were talking about the panic, how people are going to panic, you know, or how our government is afraid.
I mean, are all the preppers going to grab their shotgun and try and shoot the Greys? I sure hope not.
Well, when they had this video, it was all in the news, all the major networks, from the Navy officer who said from 2012, and they had the video on. He was on Fox News on Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson came out the first night and spoke with somebody about it, with a guy who started laughing and kind of made jokes of it, and Tucker Carlson didn't think it was all that funny, kind of blew him off. Then the next day he came out and he said, tomorrow night I'm going to have on the Navy officer. And I DVR'd that. He had that Navy pilot on there that took the video.
Right.
And I mean, it was fantastic. He said, well, this is really serious. I mean, he took it very serious. Okay, so we had somebody that came out on TV. We had a video of an object. We had the Navy pilot explaining the UFO and how when it took off, it took off at this high rate of speed. And then Tucker Carlson even asked him, he said, as fast as that went with the G-force, that's something that we could actually, you know, how would we handle that? He goes, well, we couldn't.
Yeah.
That's something that would be fatal to us. So they had this whole thing, then came out and admitted that we spent, what was it, 22, just one project was $22 million on your, so all this came out within a week. How many people do you know panicked?
I know. Well,
Nobody
my
panicked.
mom sent me a text with the alien emoji. I was like, yes!
Well, the thing about it is, though, that's because the drip is to keep them panicking. I think if they came forward and showed us, you know, that they've been lying to us this whole time, people wouldn't go to work the next day. You know, it's like,
Oh, I don't
you know what
know.
I'm
No
saying?
one really, I mean, people just said, yeah, okay, so, you know, there's UFOs. Kids are desensitized to
Right,
it now.
right.
But the biggest kicker is what Stanton Friedman says. He said, I can talk UFOs all day with people and they believe it. But he said, when you try and get down to extraterrestrials,
Yeah, they
he
don't-
said they can't wrap their mind around that. And I've had discussions with people say, well, I believe in UFOs, but I don't believe in extraterrestrials. I said, really? Who built them? Who's flying them? Well, they're remote control. Who's running the remote control?
Yeah.
They can't wrap around the beings, and maybe that's the case.
I think there are people who are in the know and there are people who are not in the know. And the people who are not in the know are people like Luis Elizondo who say there's something to be investigated here, this is a mystery, this could be a threat. I'm very wary of the use of the word threat because that means national security implications. I do not think that all extraterrestrials are bad. I think that there are many groups with many different agendas, and I also, to touch on with respect to Tucker Carlson and the mainstream media coverage, Stephen Bassett, who has been lobbying for UFO disclosure for years, has put together an excellent YouTube playlist on his YouTube channel of all of the Fox News, CNN, all of the mainstream media coverage of this Pentagon story that broke in December.
Going to the Tucker Carlson show, the Fox News. Okay, a very large percentage of the people I know don't watch mainstream media; they just watch local news. Was any of this on local news at all? Or was this only?
Yeah,
Was it on
that's
local?
on Channel
Okay,
5.
okay. I'm just curious because I don't know much.
Joe?
Yeah, he's sort of touching on what I want to say here. Back when Orson Welles did The War of the Worlds on radio, okay, there were not that many radio channels. So you had X amount of the listening public tune into that, a large population. And of that population of listeners, X amount panicked. Okay, I remember my dad talking about it. He said people in his neighborhood, my dad was born in 1912, and he said, yeah, people were throwing stuff out of their top floor bedrooms, and they were packing their cars, and they were going to go anywhere. It was a major panic. Today, television-wise, never mind the people that are watching Netflix and are watching this and are watching this, the information that we have, the information channels we have, is so numerous.
Right.
Unless you are in that channel of your 600 cable channels, at that moment in time to hear that information, no, there's not going to be a huge panic because there's not a huge
Well,
audience.
look what happened in Hawaii just recently.
Right.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I think what that allows for is more word of mouth.
Yeah.
I can bring up at the dinner table with my parents, hey, did you hear about that Pentagon story? And they're like, yeah, I saw that. Crazy stuff, right? Yeah, pretty wild, pretty out there. And you can actually have that dinner table conversation, whereas beforehand, I was, labeled a nut.
War of the Worlds, they acted like they broke into a normal show with a report, so it was a different approach.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they
It was
had the
like a
regular
suggestion
show, and it was like
Hawaii instead
a
of
news bulletin breaking.
Yeah, it would have been scary.
Yeah, right.
The accounts that I've read, last I media, is that it wasn't near, they make it out now to be much more of a thing than it was. That there were people who were scared, you know, but it's not, it was a nationwide panic thing that happened.
Well, but one of the other big concerns that I'm sure the government has is it would be a fundamental breakdown of your religious faith for some people.
Yeah.
Because the prominent religions
I
all
think
claim
Jacques
that
Vallée.
we are, believe it or not, the pinnacle of creation.
Right.
And I find that to be a waste of energy if we come out to be the best. But then again, if you introduce extraterrestrial beings
Yeah, it's a
with the
Copernican
ability
revolution.
to do things that we don't know how to do,
Right.
it would just shake the faith of the world. And who's got the big money? The Roman Catholic Church, for one.
Yeah.
It could be a money issue, wanting to keep the power within the Vatican. Also,
Well, and I want to touch on that. I lost my thought. As it does remind me of Jacques Vallée and his talk of folklore and religion. Yeah, this is getting into a different territory with it. When I first started researching UFOs, I found it quickly began to cross over with the New Age community and what some people might call hippy-dippy woo-woo. But I continue to try and research it from an academic perspective, fact-checking, looking for things I can verify. Thank you.
A couple of things. Jacques Vallée and Carl Jung both said that the experience is mystical provocative. It's not a physical experience, it's not entirely mental experience. It's somewhere between. But what I wanted to point out is if anybody has cable, you can go in almost any time, push the channel, and
UFO disclosure.
yeah, there is something on there all the time. The public's being
I watch people. I ask a lot of guys at work. I'm in construction, and no one watches. Not no one, but most of the people don't watch the shows. And when I try and tell them or just feel them out, I get a genuine feeling that they don't care. Like their life, it's not. There's no room in their brain for them to even worry about it, and it just doesn't matter to them. And you can't get through somebody like that. You know, it's kind of disheartening.
Yes.
Wasn't there something that came out from the Vatican in the last few months about there could be other worlds?
In so many words,
Yes.
The Vatican, I think it was a year or so ago, came out with a statement from the Vatican. It was an Episcopal, a letter from the Pope, and he said, basically, if there are aliens, we'll baptize them. You know?
Right.
They're welcome in the church too. I remembered my thought about the Copernican revolution. I took a night school class at Washington University called astrobiology, the study of life in the universe. And we talked all about the Panspermia Hypothesis. We actually ran the numbers on it. It's plausible that life came here on a meteorite, all this kind of stuff. And we looked at the evidence of microbial life on Mars from Alan Hill's asteroid in the 90s, the one that Bill Clinton had Time magazine open on his desk, and he had his advisors come in and say, what does this mean? Oh, are there fossilized microbes on Mars? And I saw a recent story about that. The final paper for that class was an analysis, do you agree or disagree with two things. One was called the Anthropic Principle, anthro meaning human, or the Anthropic Principle is human-centered, sort of, are we the center of the universe? Now, the same thing, now we as humans, I don't mean we as a planet, but the second part that it ties in with it very closely is something called the Rare Earth Hypothesis. And the academics go back and forth on this. The scientists fight with one another. I saw an article recently that was like, oh, Earth is really rare because of the Fermi paradox. Where are all the aliens? We haven't heard of them yet. Well, here's my stance on the Rare Earth Hypothesis. Since 2009, the Kepler Space Telescope has discovered not tens, not hundreds, thousands of planets.
Habitable planets.
53. 53 habitable ones out of about 4,000 to 5,000 total.
Well,
they made it a citizen science project called Planet Hunters. You can look through the data and find your own planets. And what this has shown us, a decade ago, we did not know that every star in the sky had planets around it. We weren't sure if some had planets and some didn't. We had to make estimates with the Drake equation. Now we know planets form around stars. We know that's a rule. Planets form around stars as a rule, not as an exception. And that is where I stand with the rare Earth hypothesis. Earth is not rare. We know there are possibly habitable planets in the Goldilocks zone of our closest stellar neighbor, Proxima Centauri. If they're that close, if they're, our closest stellar neighbor, 11, 14 light years away at Tau Ceti Epsilon in particular, and when I studied this at WashU, we talked about something called abiogenesis, life from not life, the Rna World Hypothesis, the puddle of warm goo that was struck by lightning and the amino acids started to line up on some kind of clay that might have acted as scaffolding. Well, if that happened here, and there's another planet in the Goldilocks zone, we could have multiple abiogenesis, or we also discussed the Panspermia Hypothesis, which is equally plausible. A life-bearing meteorite with endospore-covered bacteria, which can survive in the vacuum of space, or even tardigrades came here, the water bears, the little microbial creatures that can survive in the vacuum of space. We know there's life in the vacuum. If there's life in the vacuum, how likely is it that it's actually there on the rocky, water-covered bodies?
Mm-hmm. The hackers that you mentioned in your talk, can you give some insight on how their hacking influenced the government's cybersecurity measures? Like, were they just kind of the people that got caught, or were they pretty much the spearheads of attacking government systems?
Both. They were the first people to break in at the time when the defenses were weak and the guard was down. Now the guard's been substantially raised, and I guarantee you, if anybody does this today, they are going to prison for the maximum sentence of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is 30 years.
So, our technology has gotten a whole lot better recently, mainly because a lot of that, but in the year 2000, you remember the whole thing where they thought planes were going to fall out of the sky?
Y2K.
Yeah, it was 1999, they thought, everything, because the clocks didn't work. Do you know how my brother Chuck was actually working on some of the fixes for that? Do you know how they fixed it? They turned everything back to 1899, so when the clocks rolled over, it went to 1900 instead of 2000, because there were too many things to fix, and they couldn't fix it fast enough. That's how bad our technology, but that's how backward some of our government computers were back then, that
blank passwords.
Yeah.
Blank passwords still today. Weak passwords. The most common password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
The second most common is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh, I thought it was passwords.
No, password's incredibly common.
That used to be the common one, was if you wanted to get.
I hacked people with the password
Right.
or password 1.
Yeah, password.
If that's your password at home, go change it.
Right.
But yeah.
I still work with a guy who's a retired Air Force Master Sergeant.
Oh wow.
He was actually I work with a few, but he was like the top dog over at Scott, and he retired, and his stepson joined the Navy, and they were putting him on a brand new aircraft carrier, so he and his then wife went to see him off. And when he got to the ship, as it turned out, he and the captain had the highest security clearances, so he got the run of the whole place. He stopped by one of the computer centers and he typed in his old password, and it was still in the system after about 12 years.
Wow.
And then as a point, he called up, he goes, I'm getting ready to order a strike of a stealth fighter unit. I suggest you get somebody up here to change his business. Now he's,
Wow.
and he said they
What
should-
year was this?
Oh, let's see. But this is about no, he's been out for about 12 years. It's like 09 or something. He died a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a hell of a nice guy. But there's no, what Einstein is right. There's no genius and stupidity. There's a limit to genius. And it's all through our government, all through these computer systems. It's probably easier, like you said, putting in password 1. It's probably easier than you think to get into science.
Yeah, well, so both Bevan and Mckinnon, the two that we know about, blank passwords. Blank passwords was the way in. Now, most computers won't let you have a blank password today, and you get the notifications about changing your password every now and again. That's part of what most corporations call a password policy, which is that you have to cycle it once a quarter or once a year or something like that. And usually that's enforced on a corporate level. I'm not at all shocked that in 2009 the Navy had no password policy in place
Well, this is an
to
Air Force
protect that.
password.
Air Force,
I guess
right?
it's a DOD thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, they just don't change. It's just complacency.
Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. A friend of mine does your job for the government, and he said basically, if you combine enough apathy with incompetence that looks like a conspiracy, and he deals with that every day.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of people work for the government, work there because it's not it's an easy job.
All right. Joe, last comment?
Yeah, your EMF spike in your crop circle. What does that tell you?
I don't know what it tells me.
Okay.
It's just something that I observed. I don't want to speculate, but it was evidence that I gathered.
Was it private?
That was not as part of any official private investigation. It was done on my own time with a couple of friends that I talked into going with me.
The land private is the question.
Ooh, I think it was. And I think there were, if you look at some of the images, it's like a crop field. And when we went there, it was at night, and there were a couple of large dogs that were patrolling the property. And as the dogs started to come up, my friends got really scared. They were like getting back in the car, and I'm like, no. And I like kneeled down, and I started petting the dogs, and they were like cool with me, and I'm like, all right, I can be here. The dogs aren't barking, the dogs are cool with me, so.
There's no way it really knows how old that crop circle is, so it could be 100 years old.
When I go earlier than 96, it seems like it's not there, which does seem to support the theory that it was made by some locals, and the locals have been keeping it up. Also, when I look on Google Maps, it shows that one of the houses nearby is a center for something called Nuwati Herbals, which feels like a new agey kind of bathtub.
Homemade
Spicy. Oh. What is it?
It's Native American.
Ah, okay. The herbal teas,
Either way,
local business
they're
maybe.
either keeping up with it or something's just not growing back where it was. You know.
Or there's something in their psyche that compels them to keep making this crop circle year after year. Some of it did look like it was done with a lawnmower. Yeah, it wasn't like the stalks bent over.
Or just like something wasn't growing there, something was growing.
Yeah, it was, nothing was growing there.
That's a long time. Upkeep something.
Right, 2 more. We're hitting 30.
When you were talking about panspermia, I saw a show recently with geneticists on there, the real deal guys. And they were saying the probability of having a DNA molecule, a symbol, the way it does, is about the same probability of having a large tornado go over a large junkyard, and at the end of it all, you have it totally assembled 737 down to the seatbelt. It's that kind of probability of the DNA having come about the way that it did?
That seems to support entropy, and the biggest counterpoint to entropy is life itself.
Yeah,
On a cellular level, on a RNA level, nucleotide. The tornado and the likelihood of the building being made, that's an argument in favor of entropy. But to me, life goes counter to entropy. It's organized.
Yeah, so well, what's the logic?
In regards to the crop circle, when you went there, did you have a Geiger counter with you? Did you get?
I didn't have a Geiger counter. No.
So then, did you only check the one circle, or did you check the other circles as well?
I checked the other ones. It was only in the center, the very middle one, that I witnessed that phenomenon.
You talk about nature being exactly familiar with the golden mean or the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah.
And how it exhibits itself in nature.
Yes, it naturally presents itself.
We're wearing them out.
The golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence. Absolutely fascinates me. I have a book on it. Occurs naturally. You can look at growth patterns of plants. You can look at population growth. Yeah, it's almost built into the fabric of the universe.
Isn't that by ammonite shells?
Absolutely. The golden spiral is a nautilus shell, an ammonite fossil.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Sunflowers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. There's countless examples.
That's why
Architecture and nature.
In your opinion, take your kids, he in the system, could he have downloaded anything from that from the NASA system? Would it be possible for him to download something at that point in time? What do you think, in your opinion, he could have actually got from that act?
So, just to tell a little bit more about the story, Gary hacks into the NASA computer system. He remotely installs software called PC Anywhere, which is remote desktop software. He gets a black and white image that's low resolution, and he kind of sees a blob in the sky above Earth. So he switches it to 16-bit color and a little bit higher resolution, and it starts to download. He's doing this over dial-up. It starts to download, and it finishes. And man, oh gosh, do I wish he had just hit the print screen button. Because if he had just copied that and pasted it into Paint, or I don't care what, we'd have the image, theoretically, if he'd put it up on the net somewhere. But as I said, before he could react and do this, someone went to the lower, he saw the mouse cursor move to the lower right-hand corner for the network connection, right-click, disconnect from the internet, disconnect from the network, and he was kicked off. Now, as a cybersecurity expert, I'm like, memory artifacts. You can look in RAM. You can look in the computer's RAM immediately after that happens and possibly recover the data. Well, that's the hard drive that was seized by Scotland Yard and never seen again. So, man, do I wish Gary had some of that hard evidence. Same with Matthew Bevan.
How quickly did that happen? When they found it, realized it was him, and was it hours, was it days, was it weeks?
He was hacking into, he was prosecuted. Wikipedia calls it the greatest military computer hack of all time, quote unquote, from some news article. And he hacked into the Air Force, the Navy, the Department of Defense, and NASA. And he was prosecuted for like 50 counts of computer hacking. And furthermore, in order to indict someone, you have to say that they did $5,000 worth of damage or more. And what do you know? All of those 50 counts, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000. I mean, he didn't damage anything. in some cases, he would leave a Word document on their desktop and say, "Your security sucks," and get out, you know, without damaging anything. But in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, it's designed to prosecute black hat hackers, and it's about damage and destruction. It's considered digital trespassing and destruction of property.
Maybe you might be asking us from the time they kicked him off to the time they showed up at the door, how long?
Oh,
That's my question.
There were a few days, I believe.
Did he think of
Yeah,
copying this stuff
he was
elsewhere?
kicked off. He didn't think anything of it at the time. He woke up in his bed to police officers in his bedroom, and they arrested him right there. And he told them everything. You know, he didn't like keep the silence that you're supposed to when you're arrested. He was like, "Hey, I was looking for UFOs. I found all this stuff. It was a blank password." He just told them everything. And Scotland Yard was like, "Okay, thanks. We'll let you go and review our information." They went and met with some Air Force guys. And the United States came over, the Air Force guys came over, met with Scotland Yard. They were like, "This is bad. This is really serious. We need to get him." And then Scotland Yard came back and they're like, "You're in big trouble, buddy." And for years, 8 to 12 years that he was fighting this extradition battle, he would wake up at night in a cold sweat, terrified that he was going to be arrested, put in a black bag, taken away, never seen again. He fought that fear for years. That.
Well, how could you not be scared if they show up in your room once every morning? You're going to be scared if they're going to be there.
Yeah, waking you up.
We're going to let you go. You're losing your voice.
So what are you going to do in Seattle?
Oh, for Seattle, I'm going to be a senior a senior security engineer for Oracle software.
Awesome. Oh, wow, good for you.
Thank you. We're looking at start date sometime in February. I might push it back. I don't know. I gotta throw everything in my car and move.
Well, we're gonna I'm gonna keep in touch with you, and then maybe, you know, in another year or so that you can Skype in for us and be a speaker again.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you so much.
Oh, well,
Again, thank you everyone for your time.
Anybody have any questions about anything else?
I'll be outside having a smoke.
Come to me because he's losing his voice.
The itinerary you reviewed earlier, do you have copies of that, or is that just?
I can email it to you.